Good morning. So given the position of this lectern, I think you're all seated somewhat suboptimally, all to one side. All the speakers are going to be actually speaking from here. So if you want to reposition yourself while I make my introductory remarks, please do so. I'm Danny Roderick. I'm very proud to have played a role in this initiative of the IEA, which has now been going on for a number of years. We've had a lot of great sessions in this Congress, and with no disrespect to any of the organizers or any of the speakers, I have to say that this is the session that I'm the most excited about, because I think, as you'll see, the research is both new and important. Focusing on the role of women in the economics profession globally. Of course, I don't need to tell you that this has been a centerpiece of attention, but particularly in the advanced countries, in the US and the European context, where we had a lot of work on both drawing a profile of where women economists stand in the profession, as well as the various obstacles that they face in the profession. But we really didn't have anything systematic globally about these issues. And this project is meant to generate that evidence base, information about how local context matters in terms of how different types of interventions actually can be effective, as well as actually trying to amplify women's voice in the global public sphere. So I'm not going to say much. My role is mainly just to get us started. But this is a project that has 4 different prongs. The discussion in this panel is going to focus mostly on the first and second of these, which is the quantitative and qualitative research programs that we have undertaken. I'll say a couple of words about the third one, which I think is also very, very interesting. We have commissioned a number of studies, and some of them are country studies in that they're drawing an overall profile of where economists stand in different countries. We have 6 countries, 3 in Latin America, 2 in Africa, and India. And then a range of studies that evaluate various types of interventions on the importance of networks, on mentorship, providing visibility of women economists in the profession, or other kinds of targeted educational programs. You'll hear a lot more about that from Ashwini's presentation. We have a component that's, I think, very important in terms of developing qualitative evidence, in-depth interviews, focus groups, which is now extensive on these countries that are included in our project. Monica is going to present on that. And so I'm not saying much on those. Just a couple words in particular about the third component, which is this component on amplifying women's voices. It is a problem in the advanced countries, but it is a much bigger problem in developing countries, getting the voice of professional economists, women economists, onto the global sphere and presenting their perspective and knowledge. And we've called that component amplifying women's voices. And what we do there is try to connect women economists around the world to various global platforms where they can present their research findings, their opinions relevant to public policy discussions. This component is led by Navika Mehta, who's sitting here, so you can just stand up so everybody can see you. And she's done a wonderful job, as the applause indicates. And this has really been quite a remarkable, in a relatively few short years, how many articles Navika has managed to shepherd through this process. the impact that it has had. Sort of one of our partners is Project Syndicate, and I think they were actually surprised at the reach of these articles. This is something that reaching out to women economists is already something they wanted to do, but our partnership really has enabled them to reach a much broader and much more diverse set of voices. So with that, let me just introduce the panel a little bit more formally. They're all team members. The only member of the team who is not currently with us is Raquel Fernandez. But Ashwini Deshpande, who will start us, is the overall director of the project, professor of economics at Ashoka University. Maria Ines Bernier, who led the Latin American component along with Raquel. She's a professor of economics at the Universidad Nacional de La Plata in Argentina. Fiona Tregena, who led the African component until recently, a professor at the University of Johannesburg, but has now just moved to take on the directorship of UN University Merit. And last but not least, Monica Biradovoulou, who is leading the qualitative component. Actually, she's a sociologist, so she's a guest in our midst. That treat her more nicely than you treat your fellow economists. And she's the founder and CEO of Qual Analytics. So with that, I'm very happy to turn it off to Ashwini.
Thank you, Danny. It's a pleasure to be here, and I have to say that when Danny first approached me and asked whether we can start some initiative like this and write a fundraising proposal to get money, I agreed, but I wasn't sure actually whether we'll get funding, how it'll go, but it's actually turned out to be just it's been amazing. And the response from both the funding side as well as from our audiences has been really gratifying and overwhelming. With those initial words, let me go right into it. So, as we know, economics shapes policy, but unfortunately, the profession is male biased, and women don't shape economics adequately enough. Now, this issue has been extensively studied, is still being extensively studied in the United States. We have the CSWEP, the Committee for the Status of Women in the Economics Profession. In Europe, there is WINE, Women in Economics in Europe. And they have produced consistently a lot of data about the underrepresentation of women in various bodies at various levels in the profession. And there have been scholarly studies as well. So the barriers to women in the economics profession are fairly well studied in the global north. But in the global south, until our project, there really was not any study that examined these gender gaps in different dimensions. And systematic comparable data was not really available until our project started. And we, in this presentation especially, I will be focusing on the US CSEP's numbers as a benchmark. Not because I think that the US is the ideal country, quite far from it, as you'll see from the numbers, but it serves as a benchmark because it also raises a question mark about overall level of development of the profession and gender gaps in it. So it doesn't mean when the profession is the most evolved, gender gaps automatically diminish, as they often do in development, in the sense where countries are more developed, gender gaps in many dimensions tend to be smaller. But we don't really see that in the economics profession. So if you look at the CSEP report of 24, you see 25% of faculty in PhD granting US economics departments are women, 34% of assistant professors, 18% of full professors. So the share of women in the profession falls as the rank rises. What we have done, as Danny has already explained, we have 6 country studies, in-depth country studies. In this particular presentation, I'll be comparing 7 economies, 7 being the US, and the countries are already mentioned by Danny. The central finding of, if I took an overview of all the evidence papers, is that there is no one story. In other words, there's no one size that fits all. Every country has a unique path about how, in terms of the evolution of gender gaps, and they vary sharply by country as well as by the level of the profession. So the pipeline narrows at different points for different countries, and therefore, when you're thinking of the solutions, you can't, we are arguing in this article and in our project that we can't think of a one-size-fits-all kind of a solution. Every country needs to take steps to fix the gender gaps. That's the universal story. But where it'll fix it, how it'll fix it, we need data to inform policy, and that policy has to be tailored specifically to each country. So for example, if you look at just undergraduate enrollment, which is the starting point of entry into the economics profession, actually, this is the point I was making earlier, which is actually 6 countries look better than the United States, and particularly if I may draw your attention to countries like Ghana, India, and South Africa that have a much shorter history of higher educational institutions awarding these degrees, compared to Latin America and the United States, where universities go back hundreds of years. Some of these countries don't have that, and yet they have managed to make progress in terms of gender gaps at the level of undergraduate students. Each country, again, as I said, for example, Argentina, the issue is that at the undergraduate level enrollment, female enrollment share has declined, which is a matter of worry, but not so much in other countries. It's been rising in India, for example. It's continuously rising. Ghana and United States kind of are stagnant at 35%. So this is the variation. And of course, if we included more countries, the variation would only be greater. Okay. Where does the pipeline narrow? Again, you'll have to look at the different countries. Now, if you look at the brown or the mustard line, that's India. That sits at the top. It's at the highest proportion of women at all points. And the share falls as the rank rises, but not dramatically. But Colombia is where you see a dramatic decline between undergraduate and the master's level. So that's where the pipeline leaks as far as Colombia is concerned. And then it again rises, right? And Ghana, of course, is low, and it declines, as with other countries. So again, the point being that we need to look at the evidence from different countries and identify the pipeline. Now, the gap widens at the top everywhere. In all countries, if you look at the full professors in economics, you see women are underrepresented. But again, United States is better than Ghana, but actually is lower than all our other countries. And you see this gradient everywhere, but the scale of the gradient, the gap, the size of the gap varies. So the point being, different countries, different bottlenecks. And we actually have a Vox EU piece about all of this, and that gives detailed explanations about every country. Here's a sort of a snapshot. And you see, for example, in India, the country that I belong to, the biggest problem area is the PhD to faculty transition. That's where the share of women really drops. In Mexico, it's the senior researcher tier. In South Africa, it's senior promotion. Ghana is a pipeline-wide problem. Colombia, postgraduate collapse. Argentina, undergraduate entry. So you see again, where the problem lies. Let me focus a little bit on India, which as a full, evidence study dedicated to it, and these are some numbers from there. So 35% of economics faculty positions are held by women overall. Some of the elite institutions, the technical institutions, have lower faculty representation, but it varies a lot. Private universities, and I'm proud to be from one of those universities, which we have 45% faculty in our department, which is females. That's really a remarkable feat. 57% female enrollment at master's level, 50% PhD level, 27% share among full professors. So in terms of global gaps, India does actually better in terms of female representation. But there is another gap that also we need to look at. And so many of our evidence studies track not just numbers in appointments, but they also track research output. They also track citations, they H indexes, things like that. So within the Indian economics faculty, men are much more likely than women to have a Google Scholar profile page. The gap is highest amongst assistant professors, not so much at senior ranks. Women at senior ranks tend to have Google Scholar pages. Average citations for men are roughly double those for women. But the gap disappears when you reach full professor. So in India, you actually have a reversal of the gap in terms of research visibility. So what is it? I have 2 minutes left. So what are we saying then, based upon all this evidence? First of all, diagnosis is the first part of the problem, and we are on that road yet now. But we need to move from diagnosis to action. And the second half of the IEA project, which unfortunately I'm not going to be able to present today, which is about intervention studies that we have commissioned. These are studies that are examining solutions. So the idea is to test what works and in which context, and then to take that to policy and implement those. So some of the ideas that are getting tested through these interventions is mentorship and professional networks, role models, having career women sponsoring peers or helping peers or sponsoring students that they will or younger early career researchers that they will mentor. Role models play a big role, and all of us, I think, sitting at this podium have experienced that. Students coming up to us saying, just seeing you there as a professor makes a big difference to how I feel about the profession. So role models make a big difference. And raising the profile of women economists across the pipeline is important. And in that context, the amplifying component is actually doing that. And targeted educational programs, again, no one size fits all, but go to every country, look at the data, and figure out what needs to be done at that country. So we have 11 interventions projects currently undergoing, and our website, we'll continue to update everybody with the results of those studies. And so finally, the key takeaways, the summary. First, the pipeline leaks at different points in different countries. And so if interventions have to be effective, they have to target the specific bottleneck in that particular country rather than apply a one-size-fits-all model. The rank gradient is universal. In all the countries that we have studied, and in Europe and in the United States, women are a smaller share at every higher rank, and that's the kind of the most robust finding in our study. For India, the country that I focused on a little bit, the binding constraint is the PhD to faculty transition. So of course, there are general labor force issues that are important there, but that's something that we need to look at. And early career research visibility. Finally, sustained comparable data is essential. Without being informed by data, we cannot solve this problem of underrepresentation of women in economics. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for being here. I am Inés Berniel, and I will talk about female economists in Latin America. So I don't know if, perfect. So first, let me introduce WILAC. WILAC is the Women in Economics in Latin America and the Caribbean, and it's an standing committee of the LACEA that was established in 2016 by Raquel Fernandez, who is the director of WILAC, and the mission is advance gender equity in economics, monitoring the status of women in the profession, and by promoting the careers of women in economics. So now I will tell you what we are doing from WILAC and in partnership with the International Economic Association to try to foster the career of female economists in the region. So at WILAC, we yearly do mentorships at the LACEA meeting, and we do two types of activities. One is trying to group with a small group of female economists with more senior economists to talk informally about teaching tenure, publications, work-life balance, etc. But we also do more structural panels featuring top academics talking about funding, publication strategies, etc. We also do annually workshops on gender and household economics. We sponsor the participation of women in conference, workshops, etc. We also created a WILAC network by fostering the creation of committees of female economists in many countries of the region, and we group them in a more broader network. We also created a directory of women in economics in the region in order to boost their visibility, and we run frequently surveys, and if I have time, I will talk about the last survey results. And we have partnered with the International Economic Association, Women in Economics, to go more in deep and to study, as Ashwini and Danny say, the situation of women in economics in Latin America and what we can do to improve that situation. So maybe I will repeat a little bit what Ashwini said, but I will try to focus in Latin America, and I will tell you what we have learned from these three reports on Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico on the situation of women in the academia. So, as Ashwini said, women are very scarce at the top. If we go to full professors in Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, between 22% and 29% of professors are females. If we see researchers, just to show you a number here, but the reports are very deep and show other statistics, but in REPEC, we have 1/4 of female researchers. And if we go even up at the Academy of Economic Sciences of these countries, we find that in Argentina, only 2% of the members in their history were female, and in Colombia, 5%. But these numbers came from a leaky pipeline, as Ashwini showed it. So Ashwini talked about India, her preferred country. I will talk about mine, Argentina. So in Argentina, we start with 40% of undergraduates that are female. As Ashwini said, it is falling, as it's also in Mexico. But then when we go to the master, we find that this number is 30%. And if we go even further to students who go to do their PhD abroad, we find that less than 25% are female. But these numbers are, despite men and women showing exactly the same performance in the undergraduate level, and also the master level, as I am showing here, just the average GPA for undergrads and master students, female and male, that it's equal, but we also show the same for each percentage of the distribution. So what we can do to improve the situation, and this is where Ashwini also was talking about, we try to finance some studies by that study interventions, very different, but mainly centered in role models and also in how we teach economics, and also on information about how to apply to a master or a PhD. And these studies in Latin America are still in progress. Okay. So I cannot show you too many results, but just to know what is going on, which are these studies. In Colombia, they are analyzing how courses that are more focused on daily economics and not too math intensive affect the women participation in economic courses. In Argentina, they are also analyzing how role models in talks, in lectures about also more problem-oriented issues affect the decision of women continue economics. In Mexico, there are 2 interventions at the high school level because, as Ashwini said, in Mexico and in Argentina also, there is a decrease in the share of female at the undergraduate level. So in Mexico, there are 2 interventions also related to role models to see how we can improve the share of women in economics at the undergrad level. And in Brazil, they are focusing more also in a role model and information intervention in the transition from undergrads to master. So let me focus just in one of these projects that is in the middle of the intervention. So in Mexico, what Del Carpio, Gutierrez, and Rubli did was to go to high schools, and with an RCT, they showed some students a flyer where they were promoting a fictional university and a career in economics with different pictures in the flyers. So in some flyers there were women and in others men. And then they asked students if they could choose that university to continue their studies in economics and which are the inferred characteristics of the university, etc. So what they find is that for women, just showing a female in the flyer increased the chance of choosing that university by 30%. And they also changed the perception about the percentage of female students at the university. There were not backlash for men, so they didn't change their decision. And in the next phase of this project, they are trying to understand more about which are the mechanisms behind this role model effect. So I have a few minutes just to tell you about the last result of the WILAC survey. This is our second survey, and the results were published 2 weeks ago. Because there is a leaky pipeline from undergrads to master and to PhDs, we went to ask undergrad students in the final year about their decisions on doing or not a master or a PhD in economics and their future careers, jobs, ideal sector, and other questions. So what we found is that the men and women have the same aspirations to pursue the master or PhD, but they differ in the reasons where they are not going to a postgraduate study. So women are more probably saying that they have lack of funding or lack of the skills to do it than men. We also found that the fields where men and women are interested sort at the beginning, no? So we already see a huge difference in the interest of men and women. Men go more for macro finance and women more towards inequality fields. In the sectors and in the job attributes, there were not too many differences, just women more likely a little bit for the public sector and international organizations, but where we found huge differences were in the role models. So we asked students to list at most 3 economists that were inspirational for them in their career. And what we found is that women were 2 to 4 times more likely than men to name at least one female economist as an inspirational figure. And that was an issue that we found in all countries, although for some countries we don't have the power to do the statistical differences. So that is what we have learned more or less, but there is more in the webpage of WILAC and also in the webpage of the IEEE. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll be showing an overview of the studies from Africa, of which we had 2 evidence papers and 3 interventions. All of these focused on 2 countries, Ghana and South Africa. Needless to say, there's a vast heterogeneity across the continent, 54 countries, varying widely by income per capita, language, religion, size, and so on. So we're not going to try to generalize, but just to present the findings from these 2 countries. So first of all, looking at the evidence from Ghana. So the first 2 which I will present, Ghana and South Africa, are really just tracking, as in the other countries, quantitatively the picture. As Ashwini said, the university system in Ghana is a very young one. The first graduating class actually in 1953, 7 undergraduates, all of them men. There are now 30 universities in the country offering economics training. 23 of these 30 countries only started since the year 2000. So a very young system, stronger than a lot of the countries in Africa, particularly low-income countries, but very different from, I think, all of the other countries actually in our sample. So looking at female representation in the student body, as was seen from Ashwini's slides, it's low. It was the lowest of all of the countries presented, and no sustained growth in the female share over time. Comparing this to cognate disciplines, not only is the share in economics lower, but whereas the cognate disciplines experienced growth over time, it's not evident in economics, and a very sharp decline in the pipeline from undergraduate through to master's and through to doctorate. So a sharper decline than in cognate disciplines, and also a lack of kind of catching up compared to those. Looking within degrees at the dropout rate or attrition rate, it doesn't, for females, it's not exceeding that for males. So it's not a question of dropout within the degrees. It's a question of the transition between the degrees. The reasons for this are beyond the scope of the study. It might include both the less interest in applying and the selection criteria. And perhaps Navika's evidence is going to shed more light on this. In terms of faculty, as we saw from the slides, by far the lowest across the countries and lower than for the student body, no meaningful growth over time. The shares decline with seniority and also in particular at leadership positions. In terms of research outputs, lower research productivity and citations among females, but we noted a large variance amongst the cohorts in terms of those who have been there for longer and more recent, not a systematic pattern, but a lot of variance. So turning to the similar study for South Africa, a very different picture. In this case, the female share, females are the majority of economics undergraduates. It wasn't always the case. It's been growing over time, so gender parity was reached in 2013, and now more females than males, but still lower in economics than for the aggregate student body across disciplines. The female share exceeds that of males in undergraduate, honors, and master's levels, and then lower at the PhD level. So the pipeline decline is sharper than for males, but even at the PhD level, over time, that gap is actually closing. In terms of attrition or dropout within the degrees, it's a lower rate than males at the undergraduate and honors level, but the female attrition rate is higher, so this is within the master's and PhD degrees. In South Africa, obviously, race being a key dimension in terms of intersectionality with that, and looking at heterogeneity within racial categories in the female share within racial categories. The share of females is higher amongst black students than amongst white students. In terms of faculty, the female share is lower than amongst students and also lower than across disciplines. So the female share amongst faculty, it's pretty similar to that in computer science, which is a male-dominated discipline, but lower even than other kind of cognate disciplines to economics. Some narrowing over time, again, tails off at more senior levels, but over time that gap is closing. Again, strong intersectionality with race. And from a basic Oaxaca Blinder decomposition that the authors did, about half of this gender professorship gap remained unexplained. In terms of research outputs and productivity, it hasn't really kept up with the changes in composition. Let me maybe, in terms of background to the intervention studies, I'm not going to go through this in detail. I think this is across regions. Obviously, from the literature, and we could hypothesize a range of explanations, which we could kind of group those which are university-based, those which are based on the profession, and so on. All of these would need different types of interventions and would be kind of within the control of different actors. I will go through the three interventions that we have run so far. The first in Ghana, a really interesting study looking at a field experiment on undergraduates at the University of Ghana. The treatment here being 3 half-day in-person interactive workshops, basically providing information to students in the treatment on curricula, advice on study strategies, career pathways, experiences of kind of lived experience of economists, treatment applied to both female and male students, and then tracking over the period of a year the difference in outcomes. Really interesting findings showing up. The treatment having quite strong effects on the 4 outcome variables. Reducing the intention to drop economics, increasing the likelihood of actually graduating, so this was based on the results in economics, increasing the intention to pursue a master's degree, and improving examination performance. And interestingly, in terms of the gender differentiation of these, 3 of them being stronger for female students, the only exception to that being the intention to pursue a master's degree, suggesting that maybe it's more exogenous factors, or simply that they're not related, not things which this intervention could tip. So I think it points perhaps to some of the potential of really low-cost informational interventions in a resource-constrained environment. The second intervention study from South Africa, quite similar, but a bit lighter and with a weaker impact. So in this case, the treatment was just exposure to videos developed through the study of female professional economists, the treatment being unrelated kind of videos from the health side, applied to both female and male students and tried to pick up gender differences in the outcomes. Very weak and minimal effect on the outcome variable of applications for further study, and no differential effect between female and male students. In my view, I think the intervention might have just been too small, too limited, too late, and maybe not addressing the binding constraints. Lastly, another really interesting study for South Africa, this is a quasi-natural experiment looking at the effects of a curriculum change on gendered outcomes in performance and applications for further study at the University of Cape Town. This was testing the core curriculum, which people might be familiar with, emphasizing economics being more relevant, accessible, inclusive. And they were able to track this in terms of choices in wanting to continue with economics. Here, they could find no effect in terms of changes in female representation or gender differentiated effects in terms of choosing economics. This was within the sample period. I suspect that a more longitudinal study, who knows, it might have different effects. Perhaps it's possible that the choices within this year of the study, the period might have been too short to pick this up. But they do find a significant narrowing in terms of the gender performance gap in actual examination results, in particular in microeconomics. Although the channels are beyond the scope of the study, but some possible explanations might be that in the core curriculum there's more explicit coverage of gender issues, for example, labor market and households and so on, bringing gender out explicitly, the use of non-sexist examples and of highlighting female economists in the core materials. And it's also possible that the presentation of the concepts in a more applied manner may have been more appealing to some female students. We can't conclude definitively about the channels. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for being here, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to present. I'm a bit of an interloper, so and a bit of different pace in the presentation. Okay, so as we know, the data is across from 6 countries. This is qualitative data where we conducted focus group discussions with male and female students across all levels. We also conducted in-depth interviews with faculty, both female and male, across both early career and senior. Just a quick table to show. I'm not going to spend much time in it other than to say it is a lot of data. For qualitative data, it is a ton. I'm going to present the findings across 4 common themes. I know Ashwini mentioned that the story is dissimilar depending on context, But in the interest of today's presentation, I'm going to find some themes that hopefully will resonate with all of you. So the first theme is about the configuration of the discipline. Who comes into economics? And this is relevant at the undergraduate level mostly. There are some gender-neutral entry points. Students are attracted because they think there are job prospects. Those who have math ability are particularly attracted to it. But there are also students who come in because they're looking for this mix of quantitative and social science approaches. However, pre-university socialization channels girls away from math. Although interestingly, both in Ghana and Colombia in particular, all girls' school can mitigate some of this. In several contexts, mathematics is culturally coded as very masculine. And then many people talked about the intersecting entry elitisms of class, of geography, urban and metro centers, in India caste, in South Africa race, and those starting with an advantage stay ahead. The next broad question around the configuration of the discipline is, what did students expect to find when they came into economics, and what did they actually find after they started studying it? This is relevant at these levels, and again, data is drawn from all countries. So those who are more math-driven tend to thrive. This is not always only men, but oftentimes men. Those motivated chiefly by the social science aspect tend to disengage in the pursuing of the discipline. Women especially talked about how they were attracted to solving real-world problems or moving beyond assumptions and models. This is, again, not that this is true of only women, but very often these voices came from women. And then there are intersecting disciplinary elitisms. So certain subjects, certain methods, certain credentials count more than others, where women are less represented, and often women are pigeonholed by gender, not by expertise. And some of these elitisms are around methodological hierarchy, foreign PhDs, Anglo-Saxon publishing, and of course subfield hierarchies that was also referred to. I'm going to now present some voices from the field. My next click will show you a whole bunch of quotes, but don't worry, I'm not going to read them all out. I will just showcase a few. This is just to point out that people talked, and they talked a lot when they spoke with us. So this is an example of a woman being pigeonholed. They told me that they had put me on a panel on feminist economics because I'm a woman. I'm a macroeconomist. According to them, macro is for men. An example of entry elitisms, how those with an advantage stay ahead. In economics, there is a heavy urban bias, a heavy class bias, and a heavy private school bias. This is from an undergraduate in India, but these are representative quotes that they could have come from any country, really. Math is also coded as masculine. There's this idea that men are better at math. So you think it is going to be harder for me. I'd better switch to a more female-dominated field. I don't want to be surrounded only by men. The next theme is about voice and safety. Who holds the floor? Again, data drawn from all countries. The South Africa data is still being analyzed. Relevant, again, at all levels. Economics rewards confident assertion. This is a theme that kept coming over and over again. Who claims the floor? It's a register that is culturally coded as masculine. And it's a cultural bind for women. A woman who uses it is seen as one of the guys, but a woman who does not use it goes unheard. However, women who are raised with social capital from better family backgrounds or perhaps a privileged background do not face it as much. And so women then cope with imposter syndrome, withdrawing from speaking, adopting the dominant register, over-preparing, choosing classrooms and subfields where participation feels possible. Some voices from the field, and how are women, this is very important actually. How are women treated in the academic space? And there are 4 forms you can see, relevant at all levels. There is undermining. Female competence is presumed absent, doubted, redirected downward. Success is explained away due to luck, alleged relationships, cheating, or it's even weaponized to shame men. There's sexualization on clothing, on appearance and bodies. These become acceptable subjects of commentary. There's harassment. inappropriate comments and conduct, advisors and senior colleagues who cross the line, harassment that follows women across classrooms, offices, and increasingly now across digital spaces. And there is impunity. Institutions know, but reporting channels dismiss. And often women stay silent, and it's interesting that men not only downplay, but there are men who came to us afterwards to talk about what was happening. Women largely remain silent. So I'm not going to shy away in this voices from the field, so be prepared. Undermining. Male professors think I need extra clarifications because I'm a lady. Sexualization. My boss, a male, joked about dicks. I saw a professor comment on a student's underwear. She started crying in front of everyone. Harassment. After class, I was erasing the board when a student leaving the room slapped me on the butt. I was shocked. I didn't know what to do. He hugged me forcefully. I walked out of the room and knew something wrong had happened. Impunity. I showed them the message. It was dismissed. They said, maybe he was drunk. Let's not make a big deal of it. It's not our fault. It's a problem in Mexico, but I do not think it is specific to the university. Third theme, the care penalty. Who carries the care? What does it cost? And what is it about economics? Flexible hours, of course, draw women in, but they fall behind on the metrics that count. Care versus career, it's important. This goes way beyond motherhood. Women carry the cognitive load of running the household, the appointments, the family duties. It's a time poverty that crowds out research. And there's a second shift within academia. Service and admin are more likely to be assigned to women. They refuse it less, of course, and they invest more once they take it on. The work often goes unrewarded, and lost output is misread, and this has actually happened in a presentation I made, where the men in the room asked, is it time poverty or is it poor time management? There is an asymmetric cost where the transition to parenthood slows a woman's career, man's largely remains unaffected. There's an anticipatory penalty. There are role models, they signal what lie ahead, and some just say, no can do. Institutional bias, where men are asked different questions than women, and at early stages of the career, there is no maternity leave. So why is economics different? This was a question we posed to everybody who participated. They say economics is more competitive, it is more reliant on fixed, uninterrupted analytical time, and care is not considered as a career penalty. It is not raised in informal conversations, it is not talked about in faculty meetings, it does not enter the discipline's worldview, as opposed to other social science disciplines where we talk about it all the time. I speak as a sociologist. Some voices from the field. Why did I decide to come into academia? Because of the flexible hours. I have 3 children. I've taken 2 maternity leaves. I must be much more efficient than someone who doesn't have children and can dedicate all day to research. If you're a mother, you can't. Institutional bias. Men were asked about other offers, what universities they were considering and what could be offered to attract them. Women were asked if they were married, if they had children, and what their husband did. Opportunities have been denied to me shamelessly. When you have small children, you are told, no, you cannot do this. And finally, the invisible ladder. Who opens the doors? Who is left outside? So we know mentorship is a gateway. And advancement depends on these informal networks because a lot of the consequential work is happening outside the formal sessions. And the informal space is often male-coded. The norms actually pass as gender neutral, but they are not, because some are simply male spaces, like gathering to play football. But in others, women can enter, but it's at a cost that men never have to pay, where women have to wonder, how am I going to dress, and how am I going to appear, and how do I talk? And of course, care obligations prevent networking, because to travel, you have to figure out who's going to take care of my family. There is a geographic periphery issue that compounds this disadvantage, the distance from North American and European centers, between capital and province, which restricts access to mentors, networks, journals. Scarcity of female mentors and role models, everybody has talked about this. Very few senior women. Their presence can be decisive, but is no guarantee, because female faculty have faced the same hostile climate and at times reproduce the biases. And how do you cope under constraint? Women delay marriage and motherhood. They lean on precarious support. They often have feelings of guilt. Access seen as scarce, women become competitive with each other. And what looks like resilience is the cost of actually a structural deficit. Final slide on voices again. Advancement, of course, depends on networks, but here is a woman talking about how she felt about it. I realized I was networking all wrong. You go to conferences to work, not relax away from home. These are the people who review your papers, the coffee breaks, the dinners matter. But afterward, I feel drained, thinking of all the work I have to do at home. Scarcity of female mentors. I did not have a role model, a woman I could point to and say, look, she's successful in her career and at the same time successful in her family life. Final slide. I know at conferences I should meet for coffee or a meal to discuss my work with senior colleagues, but what if he's a creep? I will end on that note.
Thank you. Those were excellent set of presentations. We have some time for comments, questions, discussion while you are thinking about that. Yes, I have my own questions, but let me start with questions from the floor. So I think, Will, I saw 3 hands go up. If we can collect them, and if you're directing them to specific, there's one comment right here. I'm sorry, in the second row. Yep.
Thank you so
If you're directing it to anybody in particular.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Marcella Corsi, I'm actually the president of the International Association for Feminist Economics. So thank you so much for this evidence that, of course, we share from several times, and we act in similar directions. So. As a matter of fact, our next conference is in Colombia, so it would be extremely interesting to have this data presented at our conference at the first week of July, so very, very close. Just 2 considerations. First of all, whether you have considered to have some activities in primary and secondary schools, because this is really very important. There are several examples, obviously, in the global north, but as a matter of fact, is more important even in the global south, and we're going in that direction as well, so we could do that together, obviously. And second, considering the math prejudice, that's something that we are trying to address as well in several directions. First of all, with our examples, because we can do economics even without math, and with our journals, obviously. But I think there is really is really necessary to join forces in this direction, because that's one of the prejudice and stereotypes that we really have to fight together. So any idea, please come back to us. We are really ready to discuss about that. And of course, concerning Ghana especially, Abena Odura was our former president, so we can act together specifically in these countries where it's even more difficult to reach the institutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So keep those questions at bay, and then, yeah, so there was a second question there. On the third row, the gentleman, yeah.
Yeah, so this is not addressed to anyone, but maybe to Ashwini. Is there any study on the number of years it takes to transition from assistant professor to professor, maybe in the US, for men, and compare that to women?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Javier San Julian from University of Barcelona, Spain. So thanks so much, very inspiring. My question is to Maria Ines. Are you collecting evidence on this financial constriction for women and in equality conditions? So the families or grants go more to men than to women? To what extent is that? Especially in family budgets, I'm interested if families do prefer to finance the career of a man than a woman. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So let's turn back quickly. Hopefully, we'll have time for a second round. If you can just address, who wants to address? I want to add the question on math, especially to Monica. Did you see any difference? Did you note that there were some countries that this notion that math is male coded where it did not figure as much?
It figured less in India. It figured enormously in Ghana. In fact, the Ghanaians were the first ones to say you must focus on pre-university level. That is where the starting point is. So actually in our analysis, the starting point is the pre-university, in Ghana especially. But yes, good point. Yeah, I did not have time to get into it, but yes, it is differently coded.
Okay, so thank you very much for the interest. Regarding going to the high schools, we have ongoing 2 interventions in Mexico where they are doing role model intervention. One is the one I explained, and the other is an in-person role model intervention where females economists go for 1 hour to the schools to talk about their career and economics. And regarding the financial, in Mexico, no, it's in Mexico and city, and the other in Monterrey. And then for the financial constraints, I think that it's very important. The only thing I can say from that survey is that there are no difference in the family support between men and women. I think that maybe it's an issue of misinformation, misperception about the scholarships. So we can do something more about it. Thank you.
Yeah, the data, the transition from assistant to senior professors, that analysis is done for the US. In a country like India, where the majority of the departments are public sector, it's time bound. So there is in fact hardly any gender gap in terms of transitioning to the next level. In private universities, now that those that have a tenure track system, maybe it can be studied. But this matters only when there's a tenure track system. Otherwise, everybody in a time bound manner progresses to the next level.
Fiona will, okay. There were some questions, yes. Over in the fourth row here. If you just can hold on and wait, get the microphone.
Barbara Fritz, Vice President of the Freie Universität Berlin, and I'm responsible also for gender equality issues, so I have wide open ears. And I welcome your study because for a long time gender equality discussions in academia have focused on natural sciences. Now recently economics have come into the spotlight, and in my experience also law is a similar field. So my question is, what do you take from other disciplines learning which are in this debate already longer, and what can we take from the other disciplines in terms of increasing gender equality?
Thank you. The gentleman in the back.
Thank you. I mean, this is very fascinating and important. It's quite depressing at the same time, but I mean, we need the data, as you mentioned, to address the point. My question is, you have very strongly made a point about no one size fits all and the heterogeneity across countries. I do wonder whether you have evidence, you have collected any evidence of about within country heterogeneity and variation, because I suppose that also will affect the kind of interventions that you want to implement.
Thank you. There was a question over here, and then and Wendy also afterwards, and then we'll have to give the panel final word.
Thank you so much to the panel for such important work. What I saw as part of your presentations was there was no sort of skill issue for women, at least objectively. So my question is there a role for interventions at the university level as employers and in their role as admissions in understanding that there's clearly biases and undervaluing of women going on? Thank you.
Hi, Wendy Harlan. This is related, actually, and I'm hoping there's an optimistic note to bring in, which is to do and to ask whether you've thought about this in relation to the maths issue, and that's the the widespread availability now of access to individualized AI-based tutoring for algorithmic learning of maths for the gaps that exist. And in particular, it already appears purely anecdotally, in my experience, that in relation to women and macro, they can now, in a weekend, learn the coding that they require that previously was a substantial barrier to entry into PhD macro. And so that's another possible intervention that might be tried at all levels, from school, undergraduate, and onwards, to try to leverage this individualized tuition to break down that barrier. And I wondered if that had come up in any of the discussions that you've had.
So maybe I'll give everybody a chance to add anything or respond. Maybe we'll go in reverse order. Monica?
No last comments from me. I hope it resonated with all of you, because this is me as an outsider presenting to you what you have told me. So that's...
I think Barbara's point, I can't answer the question in terms of what we can take from other disciplines, but I think it's more in terms of underscoring the need to, because other disciplines perhaps are a bit further advanced in terms of first at least recognizing that there is a problem, and the fact that we're presenting this here is at least a part of that. And I think it also connects with Rachel's question around kind of interventions at different levels. Some are within the scope and powers of universities, some are not. Some is school level, some is the broader national level, and so on. Looking at the case of South Africa, for example, and the changes during this period, it started off not good in terms of gender parity, but then you see it's kind of top of the class at the end. The national context really matters as well. There's been a lot of government programs during this period, also pushing universities to put a greater focus on equity and so on. So there are levers of interventions that can be undertaken. And I think maybe that's where we also need to head with this, to say, yeah, it's not a hopeless situation. Things can change, right? What can be done by universities? What can be done by national economics associations? What can governments be pushed to do? What can we, as colleagues, do even within our own departments? Just on the maths, I mean, I think the evidence was suggesting it's not so much a performance issue, but it's more of a coding issue and a perceptions issue. So yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I wanted to emphasize this issue of skills. As far as what we have in the evidence is that there is not a gap in the skills, but there is a gap in the perception. So what the data we have, at least. So maybe we have to care more about how to convince women that they have the skills to continue in the career.
So on the heterogeneity, actually all our papers, the evidence papers are on our website. They are really large papers and it's impossible to summarize the findings in a short presentation. We looked at heterogeneity from all angles as much as data allowed. Not all countries collect data at all levels of the cuts. So urban, rural, state-wise, caste, race, whatever it might be. But we tried our best to collect as much data as was publicly available, and many people scraped the internet to get that data. So yeah, the papers are very rich. On the coding question, Wendy, I think in the last year, particularly the AI tools have proliferated in terms of their efficiency. And so you're right that in India, certainly, anyway, the maths barrier is not so high and people are using it. The final thing that I will say, Monica, your presentation was really eye-opening because we still are, we haven't really seen hadn't seen the quantitative results. One point that I would like to nuance is that when we talk about sensitization, I think it's important to sensitize both everybody, men and women, because it's so hard sometimes for women to advance further, that when they actually reach positions of power or seniority, just the fact that they are women doesn't automatically mean that a feminist solidarity will automatically develop. So I think we need to be aware of this, and we need to make sure that when we think of sensitizations or interventions, they are just, all around, sort of applied, so that overall the profession becomes more aware of these gaps and attuned to them, rather than men becoming more aware of the gaps and being attuned to them. So I think that's just a nuance, and I think that came through in your qualitative results. So I'd just like to emphasize. Thank you very much.
So let me repeat what Ashwini said, that there's on our website, at the IEA website, all the country studies are there. All the component on amplifying women's voices, those articles and the information are there. And the other studies, the qualitative work, the interventions, they will also be available as they're completed. So with that, let me thank again the panelists and for all the work that they've led and have done, and look forward to the full outcome. Thank you.